Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very exciting episode of Superheroes of Arabia podcast. Today, I am being joined by a celebrity who wears a lot of hats. He is a renowned comic book writer, a lecturer on superheroes, a lawyer as well, and executive producer of the Batman movie franchise. And when I say Batman movie franchise, I'm talking about Batman 1989 all the way to the Batman. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Uslan.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Sir, the pleasure is ours. Batman enjoys a huge following. The Joker enjoys a huge following in this part of the world. And I had the opportunity to meet you in Red Sea International Film Festival. So I'm sure you got a glimpse of that as well. This interview would mean a lot to the community here. And I on their behalf, am really grateful to you for giving us the time.
I appreciate it very much. I am heading back to Saudi Arabia this coming week, where I'll be giving a keynote address at the Ignite the Scene big event that's taking place in Riyadh. I'll be speaking there Thursday around 6:20 p.m. And I would love to meet anybody from the area who might be attending this event. I look forward to expanding my contacts in Saudi. We have had some of the most wonderful meetings, and we've met so many people through not only the film festival, but through all of our various meetings and touring that we've done over there. This is now about to be my third trip to Riyadh. So, it's a place we're going back to, and we hope to be doing some really wonderful things over there with you folks.
For those of you who can't make it to Riyadh, please make sure that you follow Saudi Ignite's Instagram, Facebook, and any other social media channels that they have. The other thing is that for those of you who are in Riyadh and you are fans of Batman, make sure not to miss it.
Thank you. Let me just say this. I am honored and privileged to be here with you today. I think it is so important that we all reach out to each other and that we open a dialogue, not just fan to fan, but human being to human being. As I think you know, I've had the honor and privilege of speaking 3 times now at the United Nations. Each time I've spoken, it has been to a group of people from throughout the Middle East, virtually every country in the Middle East. And what we find each time is that despite the way the media and the politicians often stress how different we are, that we share a common bond and a common love for pop culture, whether it's movies, comic books, animation, television, gaming. And it's that bond that is so warm and fuzzy and strong that showcases our similarities rather than our differences. And I think it's the most wonderful thing that we can work together and promote a common agenda, which is to entertain people around the world with culturally sensitive content
Yes.
that inspires people, which is really what the core of superheroes is all about. So Superheroes of Arabia, needless to say, has a special place in my heart.
Sir, these words, best thing ever, if I can say, for myself personally and for the community who is listening to these podcasts. We are short of words to express our gratitude for what you've just said for Superheroes of Arabia and the community that's living in this region.
Thank you.
Now, sir, let's get a start. Whenever I hear the name Michael Uslan, I recall the name appearing as one of the executive producers on the Batman movie franchises. I saw a Batmobile documentary, which was done by Warner Entertainment, a very good documentary, and I see Michael Uslan talking deeply about the science and the philosophy and whatever took behind the scenes by the legends such as Bill Finger in order to come up with this concept. Uh, it is perceived as that Mr. Uslan happens to be an expert on Batman, but when we dig deeper, we come to realize that before he became known as the boy who loved Batman, he was a boy in New Jersey. And we would like to know, how did that spark for superheroes begin?
Well, my story is a very common story. So many people who have either read my memoir, The Boy Who Loved Batman, or listened to me narrate it on Audible books, always reach out to me and say, well, I'm also the boy who loved Batman, or I'm the girl who loved Batman. And it's a common story. For me, growing up in New Jersey, about an hour outside of New York City, I was a blue collar kid. I did not come from money. My father was a stonemason. My mother was a bookkeeper. And my older brother, Paul, was a superstar in every sport he ever got involved with. Me, his little brother, I could barely swing a bat
Wow.
in a game of baseball and could barely make a basket in a game of basketball. So sports were not for me, and I needed to get out from under the shadow of my older brother. And I found solace and inspiration and camaraderie in the pages of my comic books. I retreated into a world of reading comic books where my friends, when I was little, were all superheroes with superpowers. And that was better than the best baseball players or the best football players or the best basketball players. But that was the source of it. My mom said that I learned to read before I was 4 years old from comic books.
Wow.
I collected them. My brother started, and then he passed them down to me. And I made the greatest deal of my entire lifetime and career with my mother. Because when I was growing up, beginning in the mid 1950s, comic books were under attack in America. They were being
Yes.
blamed for the post-World War II rise of what we call juvenile delinquency in America. And a lot of kids were getting into trouble. And one psychiatrist came out with an infamous book blaming comic books. They were the source of all of America's problems. Uh, and it was malarkey. I mean, it was total malarkey. But the parents and the clergy and the school teachers all bought it. And comic books were under a severe attack. Well, most of my friends were forbidden to read comics and absolutely forbidden to bring them into their homes. Not me,
Right.
because my mom actually sat down and she read them. And she said, Michael, there's nothing wrong with these. And I think this is why they inspired you to read at a young age. They've increased your vocabulary. They've sparked your imagination. So the deal is this: if you agreed to read things other than comic books, such as books, magazines, and newspapers, and if you agree to keep them neat in your room, you can keep all your comic books. Greatest deal I ever made in my life. By the time I was graduating high school and I was 18 years old,
Right.
our entire garage was filled with comics, floor to ceiling. My father never once was able to get his car into the garage. Um, but my collection dated back to the 1930s. And it was an incredible collection that just continued to grow and grow. And I'm happy to report that my alma mater, Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, um, they now have received in their rare book library, the Lilly Library, 45,000 comic books, and memorabilia from my collection, so that students, scholars, historians in the future will be able to access this material. But that's where I started. And, I was at the first comic book convention ever held on the planet Earth. I was 13 years old. It was in a Fleabag hotel in downtown New York. There were 200 of us at the first Comic Con, not 200,000 like, like today, but there were 200 of us. It was 197 boys and 3 girls. And we
Was it
were,
organized by Len Wein?
No, this was organized by a young man who was in high school. His name was Bernie Bubnis, Bubnis.
Okay.
And Len Wein was associated with him, and the two boys got into a real fight.
Wow.
And yeah, and that was a whole other story at the time.
Okay.
But it was at that first Comic-Con that I ran into a man who I knew, who was my first mentor into the world of comic books. His name was Otto Binder,
Yes.
also known as Iando Binder.
Yes.
Otto not only was the primary writer of Captain Marvel and the Marvel family in the golden age of comics in the 1940s and 50s, but he then went to DC where he co-created Supergirl, Crypto the Superdog,
Yes.
Brainiac, the Legion of Superheroes. And he took me and my friend Bobby under his wing, and he opened up the world for us of comic books, telling us all about the golden age, how comic books started as an industry, how DC and Marvel all started. Absolutely opened up that world to me and set me on a path to become a comic book historian myself. Well, we saw Otto sitting in the bar at this hotel, this awful hotel,
Right.
and he said, Michael, Bobby, come on in. And we were there, and he said, there's going to be a costume parade on Saturday night. Are you going to come dressed up as a superhero? I said, absolutely. I'm going to go as the 1940s DC Comics Sandman with a gas mask and a fedora. My mom helped me make my costume. And
Okay.
my friend Bobby said, I'm going as the Shadow.
Wow.
And this quiet man next to Otto leaned in and he said, well, boys, do you know that the Shadow was the greatest influence on the creation of Batman? And we said, no, we didn't know that. And we're huge Batman fans.
Okay.
And with that, Otto smiled and he said, boys, how would you like to meet the creator of Batman? And our eyes got wide. We said, yeah. He goes, Michael, Bobby, meet Bill Finger.
Wow.
And we're one of maybe only three people left standing who met Bill Finger and talked to him. And he told us the story of the creation of Batman. And it was absolutely, absolutely unbelievable. And then, of course, you may know what the turn of events that happened to him,
Yes.
which were not nice, which were not good. And what's been done in more recent years to try to restore his credit and some of the financial aspects of Batman, and that's been a quest for a lot of people to get that done.
For my viewers, I would just like to share some names which Mr. Uslan was talking about. When comic books were under attack, they were under attack thanks to a book written by a child psychologist, Dr. Friedrich Wertheimer, which was Seduction of the Innocent. Now, please don't get confused with Captain Marvel, because the Captain Marvel he's referring to is what we now know as Shazam. So, Mr. Uslan, this is your journey where the spark happens, and that leads you to meeting with the legend himself, Mr. Bill Finger, for whom I have a great deal of respect. And I think one of the regrets I have in my life is that I never am going to be able to meet him or Stan Lee. Now, on the internet, it says that you have a collection of 30,000 comics. Today, thanks to Superheroes of Arabia's podcast, this is a breaking news that your collection stood at 45,000 comics and memorabilia. May I ask, what was the young Michael Uslan's first ever comic book?
That's an interesting question because I started reading them when I was about 3 or 4, handed down from my brother. And I think the earliest comics I can remember, and there was a thing in America where barber shops in the 1950s and 60s always would have stacks of old comic books on
Right,
the tables there. And that was one of the places that I began to read comic books. So some of the early ones were things like Casper the Friendly Ghost,
right.
Richie Rich, um, Baby Huey, Hot Stuff, and characters like that. Um, From DC, I remember Sugar and Spike,
Okay.
which was about two little kids. Um, Superman was the earliest superhero I had, and there was a reason for that.
Right.
Superman was on television.
Yes.
And at that point, he was on 5 days a week after school. And everybody was into Superman. That was it. And the Superman comics were lighter and brighter and more kid friendly than like the Batman comics were.
Indeed.
I can still remember my brother put me up on his shoulders. We were in a candy store that had floor to ceiling racks of comic books. And he let me pick out one or two. And I remember reaching up and seeing a Detective Comics, and it had like a Batmobile that was an urban assault tank on it. This was probably around 1956. And I looked at it and I put it back because that was too scary. So I
It's
gravitated to the Walt Disney, the Looney Tunes comic books from Dell, whatever I could find that kind of fit into where I was at any particular time.
okay. Interesting thing is that when you saw an issue of Detective Comics, you felt a bit afraid and you just put it back. But today, because you wear it as a badge of honor, you are, I think, the first person to wear it as a badge of honor, the boy who loved Batman. How did that first comic book of Batman convert you into becoming a lifelong fan?
Well, it really comes down to three or four factors for me. Number one, far and away, he's not like Superman. He's not like the Hulk or Spider-Man. He's not like Wonder Woman. This guy's human.
Yes.
This guy's human. So I can't be Superman and I can't be Spider-Man or the Hulk, but I could be this guy. And in my heart of hearts, when I was 7, 8 years old, I really did believe that if I studied hard and worked out really hard, and if my dad bought me a cool car, I could be this guy. So
Right.
it was that strength of identification with the character that won me over. Number two, the car. There's something about little boys and big boys in cars,
Yes.
and the car was kind of magic to me. Number three, Batman had the greatest and most colorful rogues gallery of supervillains of any superhero.
No doubt.
And I was attracted to the supervillains, not for any kind of horrible reason, except I thought the stories were most interesting when the villains were more colorful and larger than life. And when you look at Batman's lineup of the Joker, the Riddler, the Penguin, Catwoman, Hugo Strange, and later on so many others like Ra's al Ghul and Man-Bat, it was like, okay, this is really incredible stuff. A little bit later, it's one of the same reasons I love The Flash and I love Spider-Man, because they also had great, amazing supervillains.
No doubt.
So that was part of it. And then the last thing, which I didn't really appreciate until I was actually older, was the origin story of Batman. This is not about a planet blowing up. This is not about being bitten by a radioactive spider or being carved out of clay.
Right.
This is about a young boy watching as his parents are murdered before his eyes on a street corner. That story is so intensely powerful, gut-wrenching,
No doubt.
that it crosses not only borders, but it crosses cultures around the world. And I think everybody can be affected by the power of that story. And on a personal note, when I first read that origin of Batman, I had honestly never thought of my parents ever dying. And the impact that had on me as a kid, the dawning, the realization was, I know it affects me to this day. So that's all part and parcel of how and why I fell in love with Batman.
I think what you just shared, especially about the killing of his parents right in front of his eyes, the way you have poetically uh, put it out as to how you felt is something which is, and we agree with you that it's something shared, it's something common across cultures. Because I'll just share my example that every time I play the Arkham series games, video games of Batman, and whenever I come across that particular moment where, let's say, the Scarecrow uh, throws in a nerve gas and that takes him back to the crime alley, for some reason it just hits you right here. Because if, like most of the kids who love their parents, it's a very haunting sight. uh, Even if we are all grown up, we still can't imagine losing our parents. So it makes us relate to the young Bruce Wayne even more. And definitely it hits all the way there. Now, a very, very thought-provoking stuff that you have shared with us. Now, from here, the comic book collection journey begins. You are growing up, you are finishing high school, you're going to college, and then you start writing for DC Comics in the mid 70s. So, uh, were they able to basically like judge your passion? Or because quite a lot of individuals have had a very tough time getting their work into any publisher, lots of rejections would come in, be they from the if they were from the 70s, if they were from the 90s. How were you able to win over the editorial of DC, particularly? I think Mr. Julie Schwartz was the editor-in-chief at the time.
He was the editor of Batman and Detective Comics, as well as Justice League, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman. Julie, a legend in the business, arguably one of the most important editors in the history of comics, along with Stan Lee.
No doubt.
Um, so, coming from New Jersey, blue collar, don't know anyone in Hollywood, have no relatives in Hollywood, don't know anybody in the comic book industry initially. But when we had time off from school, if it was a Tuesday, I would cajole my mom to drive us to New York City, which was an hour away, and take me and my friends on the Tuesday afternoon tour of DC Comics.
Okay.
So that's where I met Julie Schwartz for the first time, Saul Harrison, who later became president of DC Comics, Bill Finger, I met for the second time there, and I actually was able to get his autograph. I probably have the only Bill Finger autograph extant. Um, Murphy Anderson, who had drawn Hawkman and so many other great, great characters. So it was exciting times. But I was there enough that they kind of recognized that fanboy, who kept showing up.
Okay.
So that was the background. And I met a lot of them at the early Comic Cons when they first started to show up at the New York City Comic Con, which was the first.
Right.
Then I get to college and I'm looking for any way I can take my passion for comic books and do something fun and constructive and big with it. Some way to use it as an entry point to just force my foot into some crack of an open door somewhere.
Right.
Well, my chance came when I was a junior in Indiana University. It was the early 1970s.
Right.
And they had started an experimental curriculum department, which allowed anyone who had an idea for a college course that had never been taught before, even if you were an undergrad, if you could get the backing of a department on campus, you then would have the right to appear before a dean and pitch it. And if the dean approved it, you could then actually teach it for 3 hours of credit on campus. So I thought, well, wait a minute. There has never in the world been a college accredited course on comic books.
Right.
But comic books are an indigenous American art form, like jazz.
Right.
The comic book superheroes, I contended, actually are our modern day mythology.
True.
So I went to the folklore department, spoke to one of my folklore professors, and I said, the ancient gods of Greece, Rome, and Egypt all still exist today, except they wear spandex and capes. Case in point, the Greeks called him Hermes, the Romans called him Mercury. I call him the Flash.
Right.
The Greeks called him Poseidon, the Romans called him Neptune. I call him Aquaman.
Okay.
And my professor said, Michael, you're right. These are the same motifs, conventional stock characters, and plots of traditional folklore. And it really doesn't matter if we call them King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table or the Avengers or the Justice League. It's all still the same thing. I will back you. So armed with that, I went and I appeared before the dean with a stack of Superman and Batman comic books and a Spider-Man t-shirt that I was wearing. And I pitched the project. And he cut me off after just a couple of minutes. He said, Mr. Uslan, come on. He goes, I read comic books when I was a little boy. I read every issue of Superman I could get my hands on. But all comic books are cheap entertainment for little children, nothing more, nothing less. I reject your theory.
Wow.
This then became a life-changing moment for me.
Right.
Because I could have bowed my head, picked up my funny books, turned around and walked out because I had just been rejected.
Right.
Or I could stand my ground with nothing to lose. And I decided to stand my ground. And I said, Dean, may I ask you just 2 questions? He said, ask me anything you'd like. I said, are you familiar with the story of Moses? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, yeah, so? I said, so Dean, very, very briefly, would you just summarize the story of Moses for me? And he sat back in his chair with his arms crossed and he's looking at me. He goes, Mr. Uslan, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I'll play this with you.
Okay.
He said the Hebrew people were being persecuted. Their firstborn were being slain. A Hebrew couple placed their infant son in a little wicker basket and sent him down the River Nile. There he's discovered by an Egyptian family who raised him as their own son. When he grows up and learns of his true heritage, he became a great hero to his people. But I said, stop. Thank you, Dean. Thank you very, very much. That was great. You said beforehand that you read Superman comics when you were a kid. By any chance, do you remember the origin of Superman? He says, of course I do. The planet Krypton was going to blow up. A scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship and sent him to Earth. There he is discovered by the Kents, who raise him as their own son. When he grows up, and then the dean stops, stares at me for what I swear was an eternity, and says, your course is accredited.
Wow.
I am now the world's first college professor of comic books. Can't believe I pulled it off. I go back to my apartment. I call my mom in New Jersey. I'm so excited. And she said, Michael, that's wonderful. She says, but son, if you don't market yourself and if you don't market your creative ideas, nobody will ever know about them. I said, Mom, I'm 20 years old. I'm in Bloomington, Indiana. I have no money. How can I do this? She goes, I don't know. You're a smart boy. You'll think of something. So I hung up the phone. I thought about it for a little bit, picked up the phone again, and I called United Press International, which back then was as big a news syndicate as the Associated Press today.
Right.
I asked to speak to a reporter. This man gets on the phone, and I proceed to scream at him. What's wrong with you? You're not doing your job. This is outrageous. He says, calm down, sir. What are you talking about? I go, what am I talking about? Are you kidding me? I just heard that there's a course on comic books being taught at Indiana University. Are you telling me as a taxpayer in the state of Indiana that they're now using my money to teach our children comic books? This is outrageous. This must be some sort of communist plot to subvert the youth of America. And I slammed down the phone. It
So
took this gentleman.
negative publicity is good publicity, which you did it deliberately.
I did it deliberately to stir the pot. So what happened was this guy said, "What's going on at Indiana University?" And he did a deep dive, and he found out there really was a course being taught. And he tracked down me as the guy who was teaching it. He did an interview with me with a photographer. That interview was a third of a page long in newspapers. You guys remember newspapers?
Yes.
And it was picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America, a bunch in Europe. My phone started to ring and it never stopped. I was invited on radio talk shows, television talk
Amazing.
shows. Every class I ever taught was filled with television cameras and reporters. It was a massive amount of publicity. About 2 weeks later, my phone rings. It's this exuberant male voice. "Hi, is this Mike Uslan?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Hiya, Mike. This is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City."
Oh,
I call this my burning bush moment. I was talking to my God.
right.
I mean, this man, for those of you who are not familiar with Stan, he was the co-creator of the entire pantheon of Marvel superheroes, all of them. And he said, "Mike, everywhere I look, I'm seeing you on TV. I'm reading about you in newspapers. What you're doing is great for the whole comic book industry. How can I help you?" At that moment, Stan Lee changed from being my idol to becoming my mentor. Later on, becoming my friend. Later on, becoming my creative partner on projects. And ultimately, my son David and I were two of the producers of his memorial at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood.
I'm glad you mentioned this important bit about Stan Lee, because Saudi Arabia is a home for every Stan Lee fan.
Ah,
We are proud to have hosted Stan Lee SuperCon in 2019. And if it wasn't for COVID, we would have been doing that every year. But last year in 2022, we were at the city of Jeddah, where I am based, um, uh, had the honor to host it once again. Stan Lee, I'll just share a very unique story that I met an old Saudi lady from a very traditional background. I could tell that she is not somebody who is very much exposed to, let's say, the Western lifestyle or the Western pop culture. And she met me during the con and she said, "Son, can you please help me out with one thing?" And I said, "Sure, ma'am." She's as old as my mother. And she says, "I want to buy Stanley's t-shirt." I said, "Fine, I'll take you to the booth where you can find it. Do you want, which size are you looking for? Is it for your grandchildren or something?" She said, "No, no, no, I need it for myself." Like, whoa, why you? She said, "I'm a huge fan of Stan Lee." And I said, "Okay, now I need to ask you some question." And I did include her footage in my vlog for Stanley SuperCon 2022. She became a fan thanks to Stan Lee's cameos in Marvel movies.
ah, ah.
So I'm really glad, because anything Stan Lee related is something that is really sought after in Saudi Arabia and the GCC in particular.
Well, I have to tell you that 20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
I went over, I was having lunch with Stan, and I said, "Stan, how would you think about me bringing you over to DC Comics to reinvent all the DC superheroes the way you would have created them had they been done by you at Marvel?"
Right.
And I would line up the most legendary artists, the hottest new talent. He says, "Michael, you're crazy." He says, "DC would never go for something like that. That would be like bringing Henry Ford over to General Motors to design a car,
Exactly.
or the president of Coca-Cola taking the Pepsi challenge and choosing Pepsi." He
Right.
said, "It's outrageous." I said, "Would you let me try?" He says, "Well, go ahead, but it's hopeless." And so I met with Paul Levitz, my dear friend, who was president of DC at the time. And I told him about it. He said, "I can't think of anything that would be more fun." So for 13 months, Stan and I worked at DC on his recreation of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the whole Justice League. And this past December 28th, on the anniversary, what would have been his 100th birthday, DC brought them all back and published a special edition for Stan to commemorate his birthday. And the first thing they said to me, Michael, which one do you want to write? I said, there is no question. I want to write Stan Lee's Batman. And 20 years ago, to give you an idea how ahead of his time Stan was, he created a black Batman. He created a Hispanic Wonder Woman and Aquaman, an Indian influenced Shazam, a young teenage girl as the Flash. He was way, way ahead of his time. And it was amazing to work with him. I'll tell you just one quick anecdote, because it was one of the greatest moments of my life. I was with Stan in his office when the first original artwork came in from the legendary John Buscema, who had drawn Silver Surfer and Conan and Fantastic Four. And this would prove to be the very last thing John Buscema drew before he passed away. And the artwork comes in and goes, and Stan's so excited. He's going, wow, look at this great work. Look at this. Oh, Michael, look at this page. And then he gets to a page. He goes, wait a minute. This is not what I told John to do. He's got it all wrong here. He goes, we have to fix this. So, and I'm sitting there, and Stan goes and he gets a piece of tissue paper and some tape, and he tapes it over the original art.
Right.
He hands me a pen. He goes, all right, now, Michael, I'm going to tell you what to draw. Draw the panel borders of this page. And he goes, Stan, I'm not an artist. I said, I doodle, but he goes, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm going to show you. And he said, it's this middle panel here. I want a scene of Superman flying right toward the reader with his arms outstretched. And he didn't get that. So we got to show him what to do here. And I said, well, what do you want me to draw? He goes, I'll show you. And with that, Stan gets up on his couch and then puts one leg up on his desk, almost knocking over the lamp on it. And he's posing while I'm drawing.
Wow. And
I knew that was what he used to do with Jack Kirby often. And they would use all the furniture, and he would get up and do, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, I'm now Jack Kirby. This is unbelievable. I mean, it was a great moment for me.
Mr. Uslan, you did something even more groundbreaking, because for those of us who grew up reading comic books, because my journey began in the mid 80s. 1983 or 84 is the first year when my dad bought me my first set of 10 comic books. For us, it was unthinkable to see Stan Lee working on a project where Joe Kubert would also be involved. Further, just imagine. First of all, I want to thank you, because Joe Kubert happens to be one of my all-time favorite artists. But what was Mr. Kubert's reaction when this idea was discussed with him as well? Because having Big John Buscema is like a natural alliance, if you will, between Stan Lee and him. But
Joe is another one of my friends and mentors, Joe Kubert. To give a little background information, he started drawing comics in the 1940s. He is probably best remembered for such comic books as Hawkman.
Yes.
Sergeant Rock. A lot of the war comics. Enemy Ace, a beautiful, beautiful war comic set in World War I. And what's interesting is his war comics were really anti-war comics.
Yes.
Don't be misled.
Right.
And they were groundbreaking. It was just tremendous, tremendous work that he did with, especially when Robert Kanigher did the writing. They were the team supreme on all of that stuff. Joe had done the Viking Prince. He had done so many wonderful things that I loved over the years. He did what to me was the definitive version of Tarzan. Absolutely brilliant. So Joe and I used to have lunch every month.
Okay.
And I sat with him on this one time and I said, did you ever work with Stan Lee? And he says, no, never in my career, because he was over at Timely, Atlas, Marvel. And I was pretty much over at DC, or I did some independent work. I said, did you ever think about working with Stan? He goes, oh my God, that would have been just a dream come true, but it was impossible. We were at two separate companies.
Yeah.
I said, how would you like to work with him now? He said, on what? I said, on Batman. And Joe immediately, like he was hit by a Shazam lightning bolt, he changed into a little kid and was, yes, I would love to do this. This is going to be great. And then we, with my dear friend, one of the greatest editors in comics, Mike Carlin, we got the two of them on the phone together, and the rest was magic. The rest was just magic. And they did Stan Lee's Batman.
I would like to take you a little bit in the past, uh, uh, a little bit farther away from Just Imagine project, which you made it happen at DC Comics by getting Stan Lee involved. Why uh, is it that Michael Uslan was the only, I mean, there were so many great writers, there were so many great artists, people who understood the medium, Stan Lee himself, Mr. Julius Schwartz himself, and every other. But what we find in history is that Michael Uslan is the only individual who not only kickstarts an undergrad program at Indiana University in which lectures about superheroes are given, but also takes a deep dive into the topic vis-a-vis psychology, vis-a-vis urban culture, vis-a-vis art, vis-a-vis the social narrative. Because while you were doing this program, you also got the chance to be close with people like Roger Stern, with people like Jerry Conway, with people like Steve Englehart. And at the same time, you are coming up with this idea. I mean, why is it that we find in history Michael Uslan not only coming up with the idea, but taking it to the next level?
You know what it all comes down to? And I see it to this very day as I lecture around the world at universities, Comic-Cons, business conferences. The key is passion. The key to everyone's success is finding what you're passionate about in life and figuring out a way to take that and let it burn bright in your work. So how do you take your passion and make it your work? There's only one answer. And that answer is you've got to get up off the couch.
True.
In my travels, I find that 85% maybe of young people don't get up off the couch. They have a false sense of entitlement, as if the world owes them something, or the world's going to come to them, or they're going to live the rest of their lives off the success of their parents.
Right.
But if you're one of the 15% that gets up off the couch and is proactive and gets out there to convert that passion, your competition is now only 15%, not 100%, and your chance of success just skyrocketed. So what does that involve now? Well, it involves pain and suffering, because I know a lot of people these days like things fast and quick and easy, but it's a path that is rarely ever fast or quick or easy. It is pain. It is about making a commitment and then persevering, sticking with that commitment, even through pain, even through what I had to go through, not knowing how I was going to pay my bills the next week, never mind the next month. How do you hold on by your fingertips? How do you get out there and network like crazy? How do you make those kind of contacts? And I know you know this story. I bought the rights to Batman from DC Comics when I was still a kid in my 20s. I raised money privately. I went back to Saul Harrison, who I mentioned before, who was now president of DC Comics. And I said, Saul, I want to buy the movie and ancillary rights to Batman, and do a series of dark and serious Batman movies to show the world he's not the comical buffoon that everybody was joking about and laughing at in the 1960s. That he was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane as a creature of the night, stalking deeply disturbed villains in the shadows. I want to bring respect back to Batman and to his creators. And Saul looked at me like I was out of my mind. He looked like the poster for Home Alone. He says, Michael, he goes, what are you doing? He goes, I don't want to see you lose all your money. Don't you understand that when Batman went off the air on television, all people, all companies lost interest in Batman. The brand was as dead as a dodo. He says, Michael, no one's interested in Batman anymore. I said, yeah, but Saul, if we do, nobody's ever seen a dark and serious comic book superhero movie. This is going to be like a new form of entertainment. He said, is there any way I can talk you out of this? I said, no. He said, okay, come on in. That began a 6-month negotiation. At the end of 6 months, we signed on the dotted line, paid the money, got the rights to Batman, put it in my back pocket, and off I flew to Los Angeles. Thinking so naively that every studio, every company was going to line up at my doorstep. This was going to be a breeze. How could they not see the potential for sequels, animation, toys, games? I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood. They told
including
me,
Warner,
excuse me,
including Warner.
including Warner. Warner had first shot at it. They wouldn't even let me in the room to pitch it. They just sent me, at that time it was called a telex, saying, we have no interest in this, goodbye and good luck.
Seriously?
Yeah. Yeah. Why would they? Why would anybody? Because the TV show was now off the air. Batman had his moment in the sun, and they said that's all past history. There's no value here.
Weren't they still interested despite the success of Richard Donner's Superman? After all,
No,
was behind that.
nope. Because in that generation that grew up as adults in the world of Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent,
Yes.
they did not have an intricate, intimate respect for comic books or for their creators or for the characters. They looked down their noses at these things, and they dismissed them. They saw no value in Marvel at all, and no value in anything in the DC library except Superman, who they all felt was the one and only comic book superhero capable of being turned into a blockbuster movie. Nothing else had value. So how does a kid in his 20s buy the rights to Batman?
Right.
Now, today that's impossible. It's inconceivable. And the very unglamorous answer is, I was the only one on the planet Earth who showed up.
The rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Mr. Uslan, there is this one question which keeps on nagging me a lot of the times whenever I'm coming across your bio or whatever. Is that a person like yourself who has written not a lot, but whatever you have written is something really, really awesome to read. The story that you did for Batman Black and White, Silent Night, Unholy Night. Why did you spend less time on writing comics and then just move into the motion picture scene? I mean, we as fans and having read your work, don't we deserve to see more of your superhero stories?
Time is sometimes the enemy.
Right.
Anyone who has ever worked for me knows there are three ways to calculate time. There is the world version, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week.
Right.
There is the Michael version. Why wasn't this done yesterday? Why
Right.
can't we do this today?
Right.
And then there's Hollywood time. For Hollywood time, you take the longest period of time you could ever imagine, multiply it by 4, and then add 20%. It is the individual worst thing about this whole industry, the amount of time it takes. So to get a dark Batman onto the screen from the time I bought the rights took
Right.
me 10 years. It was a human endurance contest from 1979 to 1989, with everyone telling me this is the worst idea we ever heard. You suck. Your ideas are terrible. And you have to deal with that rejection, look deep inside yourself and go, okay, am I being stubborn? And is the rest of the world right? Or do I truly believe in this? And do I truly believe in myself? And I kept coming up with the latter answer. So time, how do you allocate? How do you deal with time? And I had to make choices. And the choices were that I had to move off of comic books and concentrate on movies, TV, animation,
Right.
and make that the best way that I could do the best thing for comic books as well in the process. So I go back periodically. As you probably know, back at DC Comics in the mid 70s, I was writing The Shadow for Denny O'Neil.
Yes.
And I get a call one day from Dynamite Comics, and they say, your work on The Shadow was classic. Your story of the Shadow meets the Avenger back in the 70s. Everybody loves that. You were friends with Walter Gibson, the creator of the Shadow. We want you to do a Shadow graphic novel. And I said, I would love to, but I just don't have the time. So he said, what'll it take to get you to do a Shadow graphic novel and make the time? I said, well, when I was growing up, I used to listen to reruns of the old dramatic radio shows on a local TV, on a local radio station. And every day was the same thing. It was the Lone Ranger, the Green Hornet, and the Shadow. I said, I would stop what I'm doing to write the first ever meeting of the Shadow and the Green Hornet. He said, I'll be back to you soon. A week later, he calls me. I got the rights. So I wrote the Shadow, Green Hornet, Dark Knights graphic novel. He said, that was a big success. We need you to do another one. I said, I can't. I have no time. He said, what'll it take to get you to come back and do it? I
Okay.
said, well, all right, the Street and Smith pulp heroes, Doc Savage, the Shadow, the Avenger.
Yes.
Never in 85 years were they ever teamed up in one adventure. If you could get the rights where I could write the first team up of those three characters, I would stop everything I'm doing and do it. 10 days later, he called me. I got the rights. So I wrote Justice Incorporated, the graphic novel. And then he said, that went really, really great. I want you to do a third one. I go, I can't. I have no time. He said, what will get you there? I said, well, you know, the Lone Ranger was created by a guy who then created the Green Hornet to be the modern day version of the Lone Ranger.
Right.
And they were created where the Green Hornet was, it was remarked from time to time he was the grandnephew of the Lone Ranger.
Okay.
So Green Hornet had Kato, Lone Ranger had Tonto, Lone Ranger rode Silver, Green Hornet rode Black Beauty. People thought they were bad guys. They never killed. I said, the rights have split. Since 1933, the rights split, and nobody could ever do the saga of that family and
Right.
the torch being passed from the Lone Ranger to the Green Hornet. I said, if you could do that, I would stop what I'm doing and do it. Took him 3 weeks. Came back and he said, I got the rights. So I wrote Lone Ranger, Green Hornet, Champions of Justice. And finally, after 85 years, the family saga was done. And then when DC came back last year and said, okay, we want you to write Stan Lee's Batman, I said, I'm stopping what I'm doing. I'll be right there. And that's what it is. It's all a labor of love. It's all a labor of passion. And it's why I get very little sleep.
Very much understandable, sir, because with the kind of passion that's driving you, sleep becomes a luxury. For those of you who just heard Mr. Uslan talk about the latest project that he has done for DC Comics in remembrance of Stan Lee's legacy. That project is now available on Amazon. I'm going to be posting all the links in the description below, starting from Mr. Uslan's own book, The Boy Who Loved Batman, to all of his works in comics, as well as this Earth 6, a celebration of Stan Lee's legacy. Mr. Uslan, I'm going to be asking you, this question might be slightly tricky because you always highlight the time factor. You are going to be in Riyadh next week, as we say here, inshallah, to attend the Saudi Ignite conference. Now we are approaching fast towards Jeddah season. And it's highly likely that a Comic Con is going to be taking place. Now, is it going to be Stan Lee SuperCon? Is it going to be some other type of Comic Con? Can we expect you to be there, sir, in Jeddah?
Well, certainly not if I'm not invited. So let's start there. I choose my speaking engagements carefully.
Right.
There are places in the world that I enjoy going back to again and again. I've been to China dozens of times, South Korea, Japan, Thailand, in Asia. Lately, we've been focusing on the Middle East. We've been to Egypt, Israel, Saudi, the Emirates. Hope to go to Jordan very soon. And I'm fascinated with the region. I'm fascinated with the people, and I think there's great things we can all do together. So, meanwhile, my son David, who produces with me, he will also be at Ignite, and he will be spending a week in Saudi before going on to the UAE. And we were just there, as you know, for the Red Sea Film Festival just a couple of months ago. So it's all great. And it really depends on who's inviting me and when it is, because if it coincides with one of my kids or grandkids' birthdays, my family takes priority, number one. So that's how we kind of judge it. I will add one note that my book, my memoir, The Boy Who Loved Batman, is now being turned into a Broadway play in New York City.
Amazing.
And the fantastic Nederlander organization of New York, which owns about half of the theaters in Broadway, they are right now developing it. And we are beginning to target sometime in summer of 24, where we will open on Broadway. And it is my story. And it's very exciting to be working on a project like that.
Many of us want or introduce ourselves that we love Batman. But today, the boy who loved Batman, who wore this title as a badge, and he still does as a badge of honor, was very kind and very gracious to give us the most precious thing, which is time, to the Superheroes of Arabia community. Mr. Uslan, on behalf of the community here, I would like to thank you once again for giving us the time, for sharing us your story, for sharing us your struggles, for inspiring us to pursue our passion, because many of us are in the same boat as you were 20, 30, or 40 years ago.
Thank you so much, my friend. Look forward to doing this again with you sometime in the near future. We have Joker 2 on the horizon, the Batman Part 2 coming up. A lot of interesting things, some great animation also on the horizon. And I look forward to continuing our discussion.
Sir, it will be our pleasure to host you once again. And that's a definite that we are going to be hosting you once again, because by the end of the day, we love superheroes, we love Superman, we love Marvel, but there is a special thing for Batman.
Thank you so much.